Welcome to the book of Revelation, lesson 9. In lesson 9, we are going to look at Revelation chapter 12. Now, little fun fact for you, this image on the opening page here, that was originally going to be the image that you would see on Canvas for this course. I had the course built, had the image up there, and then somebody from Urshan College got into Canvas and changed some things up, and then they put that Revelation GIF that kind of flashes. Not sure who it was. I got a good idea who it was, Dominic Kasner. But if it was Dominic, we'll just let it slide because he's one of my sons in the Lord, so we'll let it slide this time. Revelation chapter 12 opens with, "Now a great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then, being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth." Revelation 12 serves as the center of the apocalyptic vision. Now, David Yoon connects Revelation chapter 11, verse 19, where the temple is opened in heaven, along with the narrative in Revelation 12 of the great sign in heaven. But I think he's leaning too much on Catholic tradition of reading 11:19 along with chapter 12 on the feast of Assumption of the Virgin Mary. To me, the lightning, thunders, earthquakes, and hail signify the end of the seventh trumpet, just as they signify the end of the sixth seal. Richard Bauckham seems to agree, and he states chapter 12 cannot be read as a continuation of the account of the seventh trumpet, because we know that the imagery of 11:19b describes the final judgment and concluded the accounts of the seventh seal in 8:1 through 5. There are not even the kinds of literary links backwards to precede sections of the book which John provides elsewhere at major transitions, which might otherwise seem like entirely fresh beginnings. It seems we must accept that the abrupt transition is intentional. John has made it abrupt precisely in order to create the impression of a fresh start. Well, either way, chapters 12 through 14 mark a strong division in the book of Revelation. Keener explains this central section of the book, chapters 12 through 14, lodged between the trumpets and the bowls, not only reinterprets traditional images that it recounts, but provides a key to interpreting other symbols throughout Revelation. John is explicit that he is dealing with symbolism here. He calls the woman, and later in the next verses, the dragon, he calls them signs. Keener notes that the Greeks sometimes applied the term used here, semeion, to constellations in the heavens, so some Greeks may have considered the woman as the constellation Virgo and the dragon as Draco or the serpent. But differences in their portrayal here from Greek mythology will quickly alert them that these signs do not denote constellations, but a combination of traditional symbols reapplied to communicate a unique point. This woman is clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and crowned with 12 stars. So, speaking of constellations, I've read some accounts where the sun was positioned in the constellation Virgo and the moon was at her feet of the constellation, and then the 9 stars of the constellation Leo, plus the 3 planets of Mercury, Venus, and Mars, were at the head of the constellation Virgo, giving the appearance of a crown. And then at some point, Jupiter moved and passed through Virgo like a seed being born. Now, whether God used actual constellations as this sign to John or not, the imagery here definitely evokes the Old Testament of Jacob's dream of the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowing down in obedience in Genesis 37. Plus, women are commonly used as symbols of religious systems in the Bible. Think back how in Galatians, Paul compared Sarah and Hagar to Christians and non believing Jews. And he even said these things are an allegory. And he sort of concluded with Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all in Galatians 4:26. Then we have the imagery from Isaiah 68:8. As soon as Zion was in labor, she gave birth to her children. So the sun-clothed woman who cries out in labor probably represents Israel, or as Keener says, the faithful remnant of Israel. Revelation 12:3 through 4 says, and another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. A second sign now appears in the sky, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads. John does not leave us in doubt as to the identity of this monster. He is that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan. There are all sorts of mythical references to dragons, such as Leviathan or Tiamat. The red color here matches the red color of the second horseman of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So the red color will bring back to our attention the war, maybe the bloodshed. John notes that his tail drew a third of the stars from heaven and threw them to the earth. Now, if you were in my Theology 1 class, what I'm about to say won't be new to you, but we often associate this phrase with something that happened in eternity past. Now, clearly, Revelation 12, we are dealing with sort of a panoramic vision. We have the woman travailing in birth, and from the descriptions we'll see in the next 2 verses, her child is clearly Jesus Christ. So if we understand the chronology of this vision is taking place around the time of the conception and or the birth of Christ, then the time frame of this angelic anarchy of the dragon's tail drawing a third of the stars and casting them to earth doesn't take place in eternity past, but it happens around the time of the birth of Christ. And this may explain why we never read of demon possession in the Old Testament, but the Gospels and the book of Acts are riddled with demon possession. Maybe it was this conception and virgin birth that Satan saw as his time to strike, as God's moment of weakness. God manifest in flesh as a defenseless baby, a defenseless child, and Satan stood before the woman ready to devour her child as soon as he was born. And we saw this in the Gospels with Herod killing all the babies. Revelation 12:5 through 6, she bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. I've heard and read various interpretations of this male child or man child, as the King James Version says. There was one I read back in the 1990s, and I think he was apostolic, but he held a very strict futurist view and explained the man child as the 144,000 Jewish evangelists that would be raptured at the middle of the Great Tribulation. And this guy had raptures popping up all over the place. Well, the language here, a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, is clearly messianic language taken from Psalm 2. Mounce observes in Psalm 2 the messianic son is to receive the nations as an inheritance and rule or shepherd them with an iron scepter. As a shepherd defends his flock against the wild beast of prey, so Christ will strike the nations that oppress and persecute his church. David Yoon points out the gloss is intended to identify the male child as the Messiah of Jewish eschatological expectations. Without mention of any intervening events, John moves directly from the birth of Christ to his ascension. Thus, the life and ministry of Christ in Revelation 12 and 5 is summed up by the conjunction and. and her child was caught up to God and his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness. If we understand this as a panoramic vision, we have Israel given birth to Christ, Christ's ascension, then the woman fled into the wilderness. This imagery of the woman fleeing may in part reflect the escape of the Palestinian church to Pella at the outbreak of the Jewish war in AD 66. Jesus had warned, when you see the armies surround the city, flee. However, this would simply be another instance of source material rather than a prophetic fulfillment, because the point here is not so much to detail any flight, but to emphasize God's provision. The bigger puzzle to this narrative, in my opinion, is the reference to the 1,260 days. Is this a literal number? Is it symbolic for something? The time frame described in Revelation is that of 42 months, 1,260 days, or time times and half a time, which clearly alludes to Daniel 7 and Daniel 12. Remember, though, that doesn't make the source material and the referent identical. Sometimes wording simply indicates a common idiom. But using Daniel 7:12 as John's source material, David Yoon says that there is ample evidence to suggest that the strange formula, time times half a time, was understood to mean 3.5 years in early Judaism. Keener indicates, though, that Revelation seems to employ this figure to tell us about the kind of time rather than the length of time, emphasizing primarily that it is tribulation. Now, if that's the case, then 1,260 days and its common phrases reflect an idiom that refers to a period of tribulation without specifying the exact number of years. Or if it is understood as an actual period of time, then the time frame mentioned in Revelation is the final 3.5 years, which consummates with the final eschaton. So, just like with the life of Christ being summed up by the conjunction and, we may have here the history of the church summarized here again by the conjunction and, or then, as it's translated in the New King James Version. Revelation 12:7 through 9 says, "And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." Keener points out here the celestial combat portrayed here reapplies many traditional Jewish images. The end time theme of holy war, as in the Qumran war scroll, is reapplied to a heavenly conflict whose outcome was fully established at the cross. Based on Daniel, Jewish people recognized that Michael was their guardian prince who would defend them from the angels of the other nations who sought to oppress them. Mounce comments that the warfare here does not refer back to eternity past, which is more a product of the book Paradise Lost than Scripture, but it is the cosmic prelude to the consummation and end time event. Satan and his forces are defeated in battle and must forfeit their place in heaven. Until this time, Satan is in some sense had a place in heaven. It is the irretrievable loss of any further opportunity to fulfill his wicked plan that sends Satan out in such great anger against the church. Revelation 12:10 through 12, we have another sudden outburst of praise. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, "Now salvation and strength and kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren who accused them before God day and night has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea. For the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. As Keener points out, Satan's defeat in heaven does not mean an end to physical suffering on earth. The saints here continue to overcome the devil as they overcome the world by faithfully testifying of Christ's victory, even to the point of death. Now, like the washed in the blood of the Lamb phraseology with the great multitude, this sentence, they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, is something that I have heard apostolic preachers quote time and time again as a reference to the church, no matter what their eschatological view is. Revelation 12:13-14. Now, when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Keener says this woman fled to the desert for an extended period. The period times, time, and half a time refers to 3.5 years, the period of great tribulation. Now, I want to chase a rabbit here just for a second, and it has to do with the fact that the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle. Some dispensationalists, even among oneness ranks, understand the woman as the nation of Israel, meaning biological Jews, not a personification of Zion or spiritual Israel in reference to the people of God as a whole, both Jew and Gentiles. Then they interpret the eagle's wings as being a symbol of the United States, because apparently the United States is so important in God's timeline that we think we've got to work the U.S. in there somehow. Really, this stems from a misunderstanding of Daniel's vision of the 4 beasts. The first beast was like a lion and had eagle's wings. And then end time prophecy teachers make blanket statements like, everyone knows that the lion is a symbol of Great Britain and the eagle is a symbol of the United States. But this type of exegesis is not any different than how the reformers tried to make the mighty angel with the little book a reference to the Wycliffe Bible to the printing press. It projects our worldview into the text rather than trying to understand the text from the perspective of the original authors and their audience. Because if eagle's wings automatically refers to the United States, then what are we going to do about this? Exodus 19:4. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, does this reference to eagle's wings mean that God used the United States to deliver Israel from Egypt thousands upon thousands of years before the United States was ever formed? Of course not. So obviously the reference to eagle's wings is not some prophetic reference to the United States. So it's irresponsible, especially as a Bible teacher, to make statements like everybody knows that the eagle is the national symbol of the United States, as if the eagle has never been used to represent any other nation or power. I mean, what about the eagle used as a symbol of the tribe of Dan? What about when the eagle was used as a symbol for the Roman Empire? The eagle is also used as a symbol of France, the French imperial eagle. And then what about this commonly known eagle? That's right, the eagle was also used as a symbol of the Nazi Party. You see, where you live in the world and your worldview may determine exactly how you understand the symbolism of an eagle. Likewise, it is equally, if not more irresponsible to claim that Everybody knows that the lion is a symbol of Great Britain, as if the lion never represented any other nation. What about the lion of the tribe of Judah? Now, with Daniel's vision, Daniel wasn't too concerned about understanding the first three beasts. So it's fair to assume that he had a good idea who they represented. Now put yourself in Daniel's sandals for a minute and pretend that you live in the ancient city of Babylon, and every day when you walk the city, you see images like this: a lion with eagle's wings. This is a picture from the Gate of Ishtar, which is in the Pergamus Museum in Berlin. This was discovered in ancient Babylon and reassembled in Berlin, and it sits in a museum right now. This is from the Gate of Ishtar at Babylon. It's a lion with wings. What about this? Here's another picture from the Gate of Ishtar. And what is it? It's a lion with eagle's wings on its belly. And then here we see another picture. This is the Gate of Ishtar in the museum, and it has all of these hybrid creatures in the brickwork. Here's another ancient depiction of a lion type beast with these wings projected from his body. These are things that Daniel would have seen in Babylon. Here's another depiction of an animal with wings, a kind of a lion with a man's head and wings. Here's another depiction of that same symbol, a man's face on a lion's body with wings of an eagle. And then here is an ancient statue. This is called the Lion of Babylon. Of course, it's been wind battered and storm battered from over the years, but you can tell, look at the stomach in between the front and back legs, and you can see that swoop. That's the eagle's wings. So the lion with wings of an eagle was a common symbol of Babylon in the days of Daniel. So who in the world do you think Daniel would associate the beast like unto a lion with eagle's wings to? Obviously, Babylon. It's the image of Babylon he saw every day. So when we get back to Revelation 12:13 through 14, the eagle's wings aren't a symbol of the United States. Rather, they draw from the Exodus motif of Exodus 19:4, where God said that he delivered Israel on eagle's wings. The Old Testament commonly uses eagle's wings as a symbol of God's deliverance. In the Song of Moses, we read of God finding Jacob in the wilderness and caring for him as an eagle that stirs up its nest and hovers over its young. It spreads its wings to catch them and carries them on its pinions. Deuteronomy 32. Elsewhere, the prophet writes that those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. Isaiah 40:31. Keener points out the psalmist prayed for birds' wings to flee into the desert, but the eagle's wings that God provides her, this woman, probably alludes to God's own help. The Exodus tradition spoke of God bearing his people on eagle's wings, Exodus 19:4, Deuteronomy 32:11, an image also applicable to the new Exodus. Mounts expounds the wings enable the woman to fly into the desert, a place of spiritual refuge. In time of persecution, God protects his own. It is there that the woman is nourished for 3.5 years. Keener says the miraculous provision in the desert here echoes the manna God gave his people at the first Exodus. He provides daily bread. Revelation 12:15 through 17. John says, so the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Keener says that this flood may be a symbol for slander, as with Satan's agents of accusation in chapters 2 verse 9 and 3 verse 9. Satan, who can no longer accuse the saints to God, accuses them to the world instead. In prophetic language, a flood could represent any sufferings, including divine judgment, but also including unjust opposition. Chapter 12 concludes with, "And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring." So the male child, who is Christ, is not the only offspring the sun-clothed woman has, although the audience doesn't hear anything about her travailing in birth pains again or anything like that. Here again, the rest of her offspring probably alludes to a personification of Zion or Jerusalem, which is above, the mother of us all, as the people of God as a whole, what some commentators call the ideal Zion. G.K. Beale says the woman in verses 6 and 13 through 16 depict the suffering of the ideal church from the heavenly perspective. And verse 17 depicts suffering from the perspective of the people of God on earth. Beale goes on to say this view is especially viable for four reasons. Number one, the woman is presented in verses 1 and 2 as in heaven and in heavenly attire, and then later on earth, verses 6 and verses 13 through 16, with her children, verse 17. Number two, there's a similar correspondence in chapter 19, verses 7 through 9, where the bride of Christ is defined as the entire multitude of saved saints. Number three, likewise, the female figure of Zion is always explained in the Old Testament as the many people of Israel. Indeed, as noted in the comments on chapter 12, verse 2, Zion is viewed as a mother with seed throughout Isaiah. And then number four, the antithesis to the woman, the harlot of chapters 17 and 18, also represents a community composed of individuals. Thus, as Mounce concludes, the rest of her offspring probably has reference to the church. They are the brothers and sisters of Christ, as mentioned in Romans 8:29 and Hebrews 2:11. The faithful are described as those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So, your first two questions for the forum this week are: number one, discuss the sun-clothed woman and who or what she represents. Is she a symbol of natural Israel? Is she Mary as the blessed virgin? Is she the church? Does she represent Zion as all the people of God? Back your thoughts with scripture. Number two, discuss the war in heaven. Do you think the narrative of the dragon's tail drawing away 1/3 of the stars happened in eternity past? Do you think it happened around the time of the birth of Christ, or does this refer to a future eschatological event? Again, back your thoughts with the scriptures, and we look forward to reading and conversing with you in the forum post. God bless.